Hello and welcome to the CX Files podcast. I'm your host, Mark Hillary. This week I'm speaking with Ved Sen from Tata Consultancy Services, also known as TCS. Ved Sen's a digital evangelist at TCS, focused on digital strategy, acceleration and innovation. From his base in London, he advises clients of TCS on how to utilize new innovations, platforms and business models. Ved's also the author of a book titled Doing Digital, Connect, Quantify, Optimise, which is a guide to digital innovation and strategy for non-technical managers. In the podcast, we talk about the way that digital technologies are changing how companies interact with their customers and how managers can explore new innovations without affecting their day-to-day responsibilities. Ved also talks about some of the digital innovations we need to watch for over the next year or so. Okay, let's go straight to the interview. Okay, TCS has long been known as one of the giants of the Indian tech and BPO sectors, but both of these industries are growing far beyond what we knew just a few years ago, the sort of like classic IT development model, for example. And you mentioned to me that TCS is now doing technologies that provide care for the elderly and other sort of interesting projects. Could you maybe explain a little bit about this project and how does that fit into the wider service portfolio?
Sure, Mark. I think it might be useful to preamble that with what I think is the kind of driving pattern in the industry right now, which is historically, if you talked about technology, you kind of meant IT, and that meant essentially a back office function and primarily designed to reduce costs. And obviously, if you look at the history of most technology services companies like ourselves, that would be our sweet spot. What's happened in the last few years, looks set to increase significantly over the next few, is the fact that technology now goes into every part of business, and especially in creating new businesses, new revenues, new operating models, and that's where we increasingly find ourselves. So the big shift we are making is actually saying we are not an IT organization, we are a technology services provider that helps our clients drive business value wherever that is. And that is increasingly taking us to these new revenue opportunities. Now, one such example of that is where we see the potential for incubation. And those are areas where, again, historically, where we would have typically been approached by clients to say, we have a problem or we need a solution to that. We're actually flipping that model and saying we are continuously scanning the environment and we are trying to find value points, which sometimes our clients may miss because they operate in a specific sector, whereas we have the kind of panoramic view of all sectors, and we might find interesting white space opportunities that fall between sectors. What we're doing now is pulling those together, trying to see if there is a business model there, and actually taking those ideas to our clients to say, why not get into this space, work with us, and we will obviously take care of the entire technology stack and the business processes. But we are not a business to consumer company. So essentially, we are helping our clients set up these new business opportunities. Specifically on elder care, the story there is that we had some history of doing something like this in Singapore for a project called Shine, which was all about keeping elderly people in their homes without having to move them to a care home, but looking after them better. And that was done through sensor enablement of their home. So it's kind of an ambient environment where the data itself tells a story and people can be looked after as well or better than in previous circumstances. That was a research project that we did for about 4 or 5 years with the Singapore Management University. We have now taken all of that learning and that research and we've converted that into a platform which we are now trying to take globally. And as you well know, in places like Western Europe, the UK, and increasingly in the US, this is a very significant challenge of an aging society. So that provides both a problem domain as well as an opportunity space. The problem domain side is straightforward, which is that increasingly we are finding that there isn't enough funding, resources, or skills even to look after the increasingly larger demographic of elderly people. As we live longer, and as birth rates drop, the entire population ages, and the skew of dependents to independent people goes up, and that's providing us a big challenge today because we are not able to handle that. We're also finding that the care industry, as it has historically been, domiciliary care homes, is crumbling because financially they're in a hard place. So all of this means that there is a massive opportunity for technology intervention. Now, this could be done by existing healthcare providers for whom this would simply be an automation of what they're already doing. When I say healthcare, it kind of cuts across healthcare and social care. But equally, we see the opportunity for entirely new kinds of service providers who come in from other industries who could provide this layer of additional care and monitoring services without necessarily getting into healthcare. You can still provide a level of data driven services that become an input to the medical professional. We are seeing utility companies already getting into that space. But we believe that with the kind of platform and incubation model we're talking about, this could be accessed by insurance companies, by retailers, by utility companies, all of whom who have an adjacency in this market. So if you're a utility company already selling connected home solutions, providing things like home security, then this is one more step forward. Or if you're a retailer who is already operating in the healthcare space, then this could be a nice adjacent model to look at. Similarly for health insurance companies, exactly in the same way. So that's what we're trying to do in terms of taking what is essentially a white space opportunity. We've put together a technology stack which we feel is a good starting point for this, and we've put together an incubation model that will allow us to work with our clients to help them not just put together the technology for this, but to actually create the business and operating model and help drive the innovation and go to market in this space.
That's really
And I
interesting.
would say that, yeah, and this is just one example of something that we've taken through that cycle, but there would be quite a few others that I would expect to see in that space in the near future.
Well, I mean, you're talking about this idea of technology and IT in general is now having the ability to redefine entire, not just entire business processes, but entire industries even. So I know that another area that you've talked about before is loyalty programs. And this is interesting because I've written a lot about how loyalty is changing. But are you focusing very much more on improving the customer experience, or as the sort of loyalty programs we know of with retailers today, are they going to survive as they exist right now?
That's a really good and interesting question. Again, I think first of all, I would love to exchange notes with you on loyalty, because I think this space is really rich and again has an enormous potential for change. I'm sure we will find that we're essentially saying very similar things, at least about the past, which is that historically loyalty programs have been largely about what I would call transactional value. If I buy 5 cups of coffee, you'll give me the sixth one free, and that's a trade. And it has worked, and it's what retail calls earn and burn. Whether you're talking about hotel rooms or shopping at your supermarket, but we believe that that has limits, because ultimately it's about how much money you're throwing at that problem, and there is a risk that customers might switch when they get a better offer from somebody else. And there is, we think, an opportunity to go beyond that transactional kind of loyalty to what we are kind of informally calling a positive irrationality, which means that you have to get into perhaps the emotional space, or create a habit where I'm not at every stage choosing to shop with you because you give me a 5% more on my returns, but actually because I like you because of some other reason. And a great example of emotional loyalty, of course, is Apple, because we know that people who like Apple pay a hefty premium for Apple products. But the problem with emotional brands such as Apple is you kind of split the market. People like it, but for the very same reason, some other people don't like it. So it's a tricky game to play. You also see examples of habit creation where people like Amazon and Uber have done a good job. Even people who rationally will say, I don't like the brand, nonetheless are habituated to actually reaching for their phone, then shopping from Amazon or booking an Uber, because they've done a really good job of becoming a part of that habit. And that's what we mean by this kind of positive irrationality. We're not saying it has to be one of these, but we do think it has to go beyond transactions. And that's, you're right again in saying that ultimately this has to give the customer, a consumer, a better experience. I think the interesting thing is, what does that better experience mean in today's world? Because historically, it's basically meant a few more pounds in your shopping basket that you can spend. But we believe today there is a difference you can drive in terms of the actual shopping experience. And a simple example would be, let's say you were a loyal customer in a retail organization's physical store. Why couldn't you get a differentiated experience as you walk through that store? Maybe you get a different price point. Maybe you get enhanced security. Maybe you get a different customer service. But it has to be done in again a very subtle and ambient way, so that even though there are 10 people in the store, only one of them is a loyal customer. That person gets this kind of differentiated experience in a way that the others don't, even though they're in the same environment. And we think all of that's possible. And the way we've approached this is, we look at this whole business 4.0 world, and we've looked at automation, intelligence, cloud, and agility as four of the big technology drivers of the space. And the interesting question then comes about what happens when you apply these principles to loyalty systems, which have historically not necessarily reflected this. And you get a whole different view of the loyalty space if you could do all of this and add to that things like an ecosystem play and personalization. And we know that today, with our data and data handling capabilities, we can actually personalize a system for even a million plus customers. But I think loyalty systems also suffer from that perspective, that if you and I had the same loyalty card from the same store, we would get pretty much the same offers based on how much we had shopped. And what we're trying to change is how we could actually make those offers more unique, because we understand our shopping patterns, because we've willingly shared some information about us that tells you, as the provider, what we're interested in. And so there are many different ways of personalizing those offers, bringing ecosystems into play, and therefore giving you a much more differentiated and a better experience, probably at the same or lower cost.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the kind of space we are getting into for loyalty. We do think a lot of people, going by what we are reading and seeing in the market, are actually rethinking their loyalty systems. We're not quite sure at this stage if everyone's thinking along these lines, or is it just refreshing the existing earn and burn kind of models. We have actually done a technology evaluation for one of our clients who are looking to sort of explore how they could relaunch their current loyalty program. But I think the space will see a lot more interest in the years to come. And I do feel that we are kind of approaching that point of inflection. I'm not yet, to be honest, seeing a large number of organizations switching to this kind of new thinking, but we believe that will come.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. And customer experience is an interesting area because there's so many different technologies that are being deployed or tested. You mentioned about personalization for customers there. And, even that is a very broad area that could include big data, analytics, AI, even tools like virtual reality, for example. So if I'm a large company, say a large retailer, and I'm having all of these different technological ideas thrown at me, how do I explore those and at the same time keep on delivering the sort of day-to-day, just keeping the systems running at the same time?
I run a kind of a business innovation function for TCS UK, and so this is a problem I live with on a daily basis. I think the what we're seeing in the market today is that most of our clients, and we obviously work with among the larger organizations across almost every sector. I think most of our clients have now figured out how to get to pilots and proof of concepts, because I think we now, again, anecdotally, most of the clients I speak to have a lab of some kind. They've managed to assemble teams which are typically cross-functional teams of full-stack developers, some smart engineers and some UX people. They would do design thinking, agile working, and get to proof of concept. Where we're seeing this breakdown is, how do you get those proof of concepts into the next stage? So we're actually seeing the incubation to scale as being the bigger challenge today. Because as you mentioned, if you look at AR, VR, artificial intelligence, a lot of people are playing with these, and it's reasonably, I won't say it's easy, but I think it's a well trodden path now of how you create a proof of concept for some of these things. Again, where people are struggling is for every 100 proof of concepts and pilots that people are creating, I would say the number that actually hits scaled, production level capability is still in single digits in terms of percentages. So that's where the problem is. We, of course, do many different things. We have labs across the world, and when you look at some of these things, are we being driven by research or are we being driven by sort of customer experience? And we can sort of cover both those spaces. We have a lot of incubation activities as I just walked you through earlier, but we're coupling that with physical labs across the world where we are able to bring our clients in, have a play with these technologies, and take them through these journey levels of, does it work in a lab? Yes. Can it work in a real environment at a small scale? Yes. And then can it scale? And I feel that the last stage is where the biggest challenges are, but we are completely now able to walk clients through all those steps. You may have heard of TCS's brand called Pace, which are physical labs and incubation spaces we are setting up across the world. We already have one up and running in Japan, and these will be dotted across the world over the next few months, and you'll see them across Europe as well and the US. And that's where we will try and combine our not just our own technology and incubation and design capabilities, but we'll bring together our academic partners and our startup partners and our clients to see how we can co-create better solutions in these areas.
And would you say that that problem then is maybe a cultural issue? And because what I'm thinking of is, the best innovations normally come from those closest to the problem, and they may not necessarily be the people testing out some new technology in the lab. So once you've proven a pilot in the lab, rolling it out to scale across the client is actually more of a change management process, isn't it?
You're absolutely right. Although I think I would break it up into three categories broadly when we talk about this problem. The first actually is the technology problem, because a lot of times when we do proof of concepts, we do them using throwaway technology, and then when it comes to scale, we suddenly realize that the price of the scale technology is higher or it's untested, so we're not able to make that jump. And the answer to that is always try and use the platform from the earliest stage, so that becomes seamless. And now that's all possible very easily with a lot of cloud-based platforms. The second challenge is the business case. And again, we find that a lot of times doing a proof of concept, you can get a successful proof of concept because kind of conceptually it works, but no one has actually done the work of establishing what the business case for the scale solution will be. And it kind of falls into that chasm at that point because those numbers aren't available. So the solution there is to build the business case thinking into the proof of concept. And if there are critical numbers you need to establish, then make sure that the POC throws them up. Whether that's a conversion rate or an adoption rate or whatever other metric is going to be required for you to prove your business case, really needs to come out of the proof of concept. And the third part, as you rightly said, is actually the culture. That's where the change management comes in. That's where shepherding a new idea, especially a disruptive one, through a large organization is always tricky. It will either get killed or it will get watered down by committee until, when it comes out at the other end, it doesn't look like the original idea at all. So I think that we need to distinguish there in a way between sort of what is marginal innovation versus disruptive innovation. And I would even say what is business versus technology innovation a little bit. So if you were doing stuff that is essentially business innovation and potentially marginal, as you lean towards those two directions, then all of that should be done as close to the customer as possible. Typically, it can be done by operational teams. It can be done alongside day jobs. The more you lean towards disruptive innovation, though, or innovation that's driven by technology research, that's quite hard to do at the customer interface because of the very nature of disruptive innovation. It requires a fundamental change in the way you think. And that's hard to do along with your day job. Mm-hmm. So when you're looking at disruptive innovation or technology innovation, which is breakthrough, then you need to do that in a lab somewhere far away and figure out a way to then bring that through the organization. Now, the idea of distance, actually, when I was looking at your question, the way you phrased it, the idea of distance is actually an interesting one because you could say that there is When you say close to customer, that may not be close to operations. And I'm forgive me for rambling, but I'm trying to establish that you may have a scenario where you are actually close to the customer because you are choosing to test it with real customers in a real world environment, but you're not making it part of your day-to-day operations. So we can look at distance as distance from your operations, or we can look at it as distance from your customers. You would never want to do something that's too far removed from your customers because there's always a reality it won't work when you actually bring it out. But you can remove it from your day-to-day operations and run it as a separate entity or an experiment where you are talking to real customers and scaling it as you would a startup, and treat it that way. I think the net answer, though, is that there is no single answer. I mean, if we could land up and say we've got all the answers, that would be great. But every industry is different, every customer is different, and therefore the challenges, organizational, technical, legacy, all these are different. So I think what we need to be doing is providing a range of options and like a toolkit from which you can pick all of these bits. Do you need a lab? Yes. Or do you need access to research on this in a particular area? Yes. Do you need customer testing? Yes. So we then combine these things in the right manner and find the shortest path to revenues and profits for our clients.
Okay, that's great. And so then, I mean, we've talked about a lot of different digital innovations and different platforms today. And I know that's your focus at TCS. I mean, if you're looking over the year ahead or the next 18 months, what are some of the most interesting sort of projects or platforms that you think that you're going to be working on then?
I think a lot of our clients have already started their transformational journeys, over the past few years. And usually, the first step in that is the very painful bit about fixing your legacy. So, to your question, I think for those clients who have crossed that hump of sorting out some of their backend systems, the next few years will look really exciting because then you'll see the true transformational urgency coming through. That's when we start looking at changing operational, the entire operating models, operational processes, and that will then allow them to be strategically more nimble. So we'll see launch of new products and new services at a scale that's faster. So I guess I'm saying that we'll see more urgency in the transformation. We'll see more new products and service innovation coming through. We are seeing a quite an interesting challenge coming through in terms of digital literacy across a lot of businesses because the rank and file of most companies, people across middle management, up to senior management, sometimes aren't as yet as digitally aware, savvy as perhaps they need to be. So that's going to be something we'll look to address. And I think that the sheer appetite for innovation is going up because most of our clients are recognizing that business as usual is not going to get them where they need to go in terms of revenues. And I can't think of a single sector that's not challenged by either a tech major or a startup in their space. So I think these are some of the key drivers going forward. Obviously, data, AI, and the whole cognitive approach to business is something that's very fundamental, and we're going to see some of that. But around that, I did want to call out that I think we're also going to see a more growing consciousness of the world around us. And I think we are reaching that point where most organizations need to see their role not just as profit engines but also as social engines. And you know that the Tata Group, for example, has a history of nation building, and we've always believed that we exist not just to serve our shareholders, but to serve the communities we work in. So the example that we started with, which was elder care, is an excellent example of where, of course, there's a business model there, but it also serves a broader social need. And I'm certainly excited by the fact that a lot of our clients, and the companies we work with are all starting to consider what is their broader remit beyond delivering profits to shareholders. And technology will certainly help them do that much, much more effectively. So that's the other thing I'm really excited about.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. Please take a moment to review the podcast because this helps other listeners to find it. And if you have any suggestions, then get in touch with me on Twitter or LinkedIn. I'm at Mark Hillary with 2 L's, or just search Google for Mark Hillary.